Welcome back to Billionaire Soul Stories. Please listen to the story set in Harbor Light City, Oregon. USA two 8-year-old twin girls rode a winter bus alone, wearing an oversized apron and carrying their sick mother's resume. They stepped into a Billionaire'S glass tower shaking with fear. He thought it was just another evening. He was wrong. That moment rewrote every life involved forever without warning or mercy. Sterling Crown stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office 42 floors above Harbor Light City. Below him, the harbor lights flickered on one by one, reflected in dark winter water like broken stars. Cargo ships drifted slowly in the distance. The city was alive. He felt nothing. At 47, Sterling has everything most men spend their whole lives chasing. Crown urban estates dominated the skyline, glass towers, luxury residences, commercial blocks with his name etched into steel and stone. 3 decades of relentless ambition had turned a single rundown property into an empire. The view was proof, and lately it felt like a reminder of what was missing. 4 years had passed since Eleanor died. Cancer, fast, cruel. The penthouse they once shared now echoed with silence, no laughter, no music drifting from the kitchen, no soft arguments over paint colors or dinner plans. His son lived in Boston now, busy with his own family, his own life. Sterling encouraged that distance. It was easier than admitting how empty his evenings felt. He worked late because there was nowhere else to go. Sterling loosened his tie and exhaled slowly, watching his own reflection in the glass. A powerful man stared back, tailored suit silver at the temple's posture carved by control. But the eyes were tired. Eleanor used to say success meant nothing if you had no one to share the view with. Back then he'd smiled and kissed her forehead, half listening. Now her words haunted him. The clock on his wall clicked toward 6. Another night alone. Another dinner eaten standing over the sink. Another reminder that an empire could still be painfully, devastatingly quiet. The intercom buzzed sharp and intrusive, cutting through the stillness of Sterling's office. He frowned slightly. Nadine never interrupted him after hours unless it mattered. Mr. Crown, Nadine Rowe's voice came through hesitant in a way he'd never heard before. There's an unusual situation at reception. Sterling turned from the window. Unusual how A pause. Papers shuffled on the other end. There are 2 children downstairs, sir. 2, they say they're here for the housekeeping interview. Sterling blinked. Children, yes. Twin girls. About 8 years old, I'd guess. Nadine lowered her voice. They said their mother was supposed to come today, but she's sick. Very sick. So, they came instead. Something stirred in Sterling's chest, an uncomfortable mix of disbelief and concern. Security isn't sure what to do, Nadine added. They won't leave. They're very polite, very insistent. Silence filled the room. Children didn't wander into corporate towers by accident, especially not in winter, especially not with a purpose. Sterling walked back toward his desk, his shoes clicking against polished stone. His instinct said this was none of his responsibility. HR could handle it. Security could escort them out. Life would go on unchanged. But another voice, quieter, older, whispered that he should at least look. How long have they been waiting? He asked. Nearly 20 minutes. Sterling glanced once more at the city beyond the glass. Eleanor would have already been in the elevator. Send them up, he said suddenly. Sir, I'll speak with them myself. There was a brief pause, then relief in Nadine's tone. Yes, Mr. Crown. The intercom clicked off. Sterling didn't know why he'd said yes. Only that for the first time that evening, the silence in his office felt expectant. 5 minutes later, the office doors opened. Sterling looked up and froze. 2 small figures stood in the doorway, dwarfed by glass walls and towering shelves of awards. Twin girls. Identical in face, but not in presence. Both wore thin blue-collared shirts, dark leggings, and worn sneakers dusted with dried snow. Their hair, sun-gold and tangled, fell past their shoulders. But what caught Sterling's breath was the apron. A white housekeeping apron, unmistakably adult-sized, wrapped around them, both tied and retied until it barely held. It hung like borrowed armor, like something sacred. The girl on the left stepped forward first. "My name is Maris Reyes," she said, clearly lifting her chin. Her voice was steady, practiced. "This is my sister, Mina." Mina clutched a folded piece of paper with both hands. Her fingers trembled, but her eyes didn't leave Sterling's face. "We're here for the housekeeping job," Mina added softly. Sterling moved around his desk and lowered himself to their eye level, his knees protesting the unfamiliar motion. He hadn't knelt like this in years. "I'm Sterling Crown," he said gently. "It's nice to meet you both." Up close, he could see it, the exhaustion beneath their youth. Shadows no 8-year-old should carry. The kind that came from listening through walls at night, from learning too early how fragile safety could be. "Our mom is sick," Maris continued. "She has a high fever. She couldn't come." Mina held out the paper arms, shaking. "This is her resume." Sterling took it with care as if it might break. "And the apron?" he asked quietly. Maris swallowed. "So you'd know we're serious." Something cracked open inside his chest. 2 small shadows had walked into his empire, and without knowing it, they had already begun to change everything. Sterling kept his posture low still at the twins' eye level, but the room suddenly felt too big for them, too cold, too polished, too unforgiving. Behind Maris and Mina, the office doors eased shut with a soft click that sounded final, like a vault ceiling. Nadine stood a few steps away, hands clasped, watching like she was afraid the girls might vanish if she blinked. Sterling opened the resume slowly. The paper was creased, the corners softened from being held too tightly too long. He didn't read yet. He studied the twins first. Maris was the shield. She stood slightly in front, feet planted, chin-up, eyes locked forward with a determination that didn't match the tremble in her small hands. Mina hovered half a step behind, pressed close as if warmth could be shared by proximity alone. Her fingers were pink from the cold. Her lashes still carried melted snow. "You rode the elevator up?" Sterling asked, keeping his tone light, careful. Maris nodded. "Yes, sir. The lady at the desk said we could if we stayed together." "And you're not afraid of heights?" Mina's voice was a whisper. "We're more afraid of other things." Maris shot her sister a look, gentle warning, not anger. Mina swallowed and looked down at the apron wrapped around them like a bandage. Sterling glanced at the apron again. It had been folded and tied so many times the knot was thick as a fist. There were faint bleach stains near the hem. A small tear at the seam had been stitched with dark thread, an invisible repair to anyone who wasn't looking for pain. "Whose apron is that?" he asked. "Our mom's," Maris answered. "It's her work one," Mina added quietly. "It smells like soap, like the hospital." Sterling's throat tightened. He hadn't been in a hospital since Eleanor's final days. He remembered the smell, sterile, sharp, merciless. The way it clung to clothes long after you left, as if it wanted to follow you home. He forced a slow breath. "Tell me about your mother." Maris exhaled like she'd been holding air since the lobby. "Her name is Lucia Reyes. She cleans at Harbor Light General at night. Sometimes she cleans houses in the daytime too. She's good. She's really good." "And today?" Sterling asked. Mina's eyes shimmered. Today she couldn't stand up. The words landed hard. Sterling felt it, something old in him, something human waking up. He glanced at the clock, then back at their faces. "Sit down," he said, gesturing toward the leather chairs by the window. "Both of you." They climbed up carefully, like the chairs were unfamiliar machines. Their feet dangled above the floor, swinging nervously. Mina smoothed the apron over her knees like it was a blanket. Sterling took the chair opposite them, not behind his desk, not above them. He wanted them to feel for once that a powerful man could be close enough to hear the truth. Outside Harbor Light City burned with winter lights. Inside, 2 8-year-old girls sat in an oversized apron trying not to fall apart. Sterling unfolded the resume fully and finally read. Lucia Reyes Housekeeping/Facilities, 15 years experience, hospital overnight sanitation, private residences, references listed, reliable transportation bus, bilingual, flexible hours. It was clean, straightforward. The kind of document built by someone who didn't have time for pretty words, only survival. But it wasn't the typed lines that caught Sterling. It was the handwriting. At the top, in careful ink, Lucia had added a note as if she couldn't trust the page to speak for her. Single mother to twins, Maris and Mina, age 8. My daughters are my everything. Sterling stared at it a beat too long. The letters blurred slightly, and he realized with quiet shock that his eyes had watered. Across from him, Mina was watching his face like she was searching for a verdict. Maris held her breath, trying to stay brave enough for two. She wrote this about you, Sterling said softly, tapping the line with his finger. Mina's composure broke. Tears slid down her cheeks, fast and silent. She wiped them angrily, as if crying was a betrayal of the mission. Maris spoke before her sister could spiral. She doesn't say it to make you feel sorry. She just wants you to know we're not trouble. We're a team, Mina whispered, voice cracking. She says we're a team. Sterling leaned forward. Why did you come instead of her? Why not reschedule? Maris swallowed. The answer hurt. Because the landlord doesn't reschedule. The sentence was so adult it felt violent coming from a child. Sterling didn't speak right away, because his mind flashed to his own son at 8 warm bed hot chocolate problems measured in homework and scraped knees. Mom was on the phone last night, Mina said. We heard her. Maris's jaw tightened. She was asking for more time. She said she'd pay. She said she was sick, but she'd work anyway. The landlord said if we don't pay, we have to leave. Mina's hands twisted in the apron. She cried after the call. She tried to be quiet, but we heard it. We always hear it. Sterling felt the air in his office change like the temperature had dropped. And your mom has a fever, he said, steadying his voice. Mina nodded, tears spilling again. She was shaking. She put blankets on. Then she said, I can't miss this interview. But she couldn't get up. Maris looked straight at him, eyes too sharp for 8. So we came. Because if she loses the apartment, we lose everything. Sterling's fingers tightened around the resume. Not in anger, something worse. In realization. 2 children had stepped into his tower because the world had taught them no one was coming to save them. Sterling, crown owner of half this city, suddenly felt very small and very, very responsible. Sterling set the resume down carefully, as if it were fragile glass. How did you get here, he asked. Mina's shoulders rose, then fell. The bus. Sterling blinked. You took the bus. Alone, Maris nodded once. Mom taught us. Route 9 from South Harbor. Then we transfer downtown. Nadine, who'd been quiet near the door, inhaled sharply. Sterling caught it, her shock, her controlled outrage. Sterling forced himself to stay calm. And you knew where to get off, Mina's lips trembled. We practiced. Mom points out landmarks. The big mural with the whale, the coffee shop that smells like cinnamon, the bookstore with the green sign. Maris added, she says if we get scared, we count the stops. 7 stops, then get off. Don't talk to strangers. Stay where the lights are. Sterling felt something twist inside him. Those were not lessons children should have to learn. Those were survival rules. Mina looked down at her hands. We had bus money in a jar. For emergencies. What kind of emergency, Sterling asked, though he already knew. Mina's voice came out thin. Getting to work. Or getting to somewhere safe. Maris leaned forward, urgency rising. We left her a note, so she wouldn't think we got taken. Sterling's jaw clenched. A note, Mina nodded quickly. I put it on her pillow. It said, "Mommy, we're helping. Please don't be mad. We love you." For a second, Sterling couldn't breathe. The image hit him with brutal clarity, Lucia waking up feverish, reaching for her daughters, finding only cold sheets and a piece of paper. Fear. Panic. The kind that turns your blood to ice. Sterling stood abruptly and paced 2 steps, then stopped, forcing the storm inside him back into order. He had built an empire by controlling outcomes, but nothing about this was controllable. 2 8-year-olds had crossed a winter city alone. He turned back to them and lowered his voice. "You should never have had to do that," he said. Maris's eyes flashed. "But we did," Mina whispered, "because nobody else would." The words struck Sterling like a slap, not because they were rude, because they were true. He crouched again, closer now, as if distance could be an insult. "Listen to me," Sterling said, each word deliberate. "You are not in trouble. You are not too little to matter. You walked into a place meant for adults, and you spoke up for your mother. That takes courage most grown men don't have." Mina's eyes lifted, searching, hope and fear wrestling in her gaze. Maris held her sister's hand under the apron. Sterling glanced at Nadine. "Get me Lucia Reyes's number from the application file. Now." Nadine moved immediately. Sterling looked back at the twins, 2 small hearts trying to carry an impossible weight. First he said gently, "We call your mom. We tell her you're safe." He paused, and for the first time in years, his voice softened into something like warmth. Then he added, "We figure out how your family stops living like the world can break you at any moment." Outside the windows, the harbor lights burned brighter. Inside, the day Sterling Crown thought would be lonely was suddenly irreversible. Nadine returned quietly, phone already in hand, a name glowing on the screen. Lucia Reyes. Sterling took it, steadying himself before pressing call. The line rang once, twice, then a breathless gasp. Maris, Mina. The voice was raw, hoarse, soaked in fear. "Where are you? Oh God, Mama, it's us," Maris said quickly, leaning forward so Mina could hear too. "We're okay. Please don't cry." Mina pressed her lips together, tears spilling anyway. "We're safe. We're together." Sterling lifted the phone gently. "Mrs. Reyes," he said, his tone calm, grounded. "My name is Sterling Crown. Your daughters are in my office. They are safe." Silence. Then a sob, deep, shaking, uncontrollable. "I woke up and they were gone," Lucia cried. "I couldn't stand. I tried to call, but the phone fell. Please, I'm so sorry, they shouldn't have. They came because they love you." Sterling interrupted softly. "And because they were worried." Maris squeezed Mina's hand harder. Mina leaned forward, whispering into the phone. "We didn't mean to scare you. We just wanted to help." Lucia's breathing stuttered. "My babies? I was so afraid." Sterling closed his eyes briefly. The sound of a mother's terror, pure animal, endless, cut deeper than any boardroom failure ever had. "You did nothing wrong," Sterling said. "Your daughters are extraordinary, but they should never have had to be this brave." There was a pause, then Lucia spoke again, quieter, now exhausted. "Mr. Crown, I'm so embarrassed. I don't know how to apologize. I missed the interview. I know what that means." Sterling looked at the twins, 2 girls sitting straight in an oversized apron, waiting for a verdict that would decide their lives. "No," he said. "You didn't miss it." Lucia inhaled sharply. "What your daughters came to interview for you," Sterling continued. And I listened. The room felt suspended, like the second before a storm breaks. "I'd like you to rest," he said gently. "Drink water. We'll take care of the rest." Mina whispered, hopeful but terrified. "Does that mean Sterling smiled, a real smile, one he hadn't felt in years. It means he said this conversation isn't over. Sterling ended the call slowly, as if hanging up too fast might undo everything. Maris exhaled for the first time in minutes. Mina wiped her cheeks with the edge of the apron, smearing faint bleach marks across her sleeve. "Is she mad?" Mina asked. "No," Sterling said. "She's relieved." Maris nodded, absorbing that like information she could store for later. "She cries when she's relieved." Sterling turned his chair, slightly facing them fully. "Not a CEO now. Just a man making a choice. Girls." He began, "Your mother applied for a housekeeping position in one of our buildings." Mina's eyes widened. Maris sat up straighter. "She has the experience," Sterling continued. "And more importantly, she has integrity. That matters." Maris swallowed. "So, she gets the job." Sterling didn't answer right away. He stood, walked back to his desk, and picked up the resume again. Then he did something no one in this building had ever seen him do. He set it aside. "I don't think housekeeping is enough," he said. The twins froze. "What do you mean?" Maris asked carefully. Sterling turned back to them. "Your mother doesn't just clean. She manages chaos. She works nights, days, raises 2 children, keeps a home together while sick. That's leadership." Mina's mouth opened slightly. "Leadership, yes," Sterling said. "I want to offer her a position managing the housekeeping teams across our residential properties." The words landed heavy. "That comes with a salary," he added, "benefits. Health insurance, paid leave." Maris blinked. Mina clutched the apron. And Sterling continued, voice steady, "A 2-bedroom apartment in one of our buildings. Close to schools. Safe. Warm." For a heartbeat, neither girl spoke. Then Mina's breath hitched. "We wouldn't have to move." "No," Sterling said firmly. "You wouldn't." Maris's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She nodded once, sharp and grateful. "Thank you." Sterling felt something ease inside him, like a knot he hadn't known was there. But Mina whispered, fear creeping back in. "Why would you do this?" Sterling thought of Eleanor, of the quiet dinners, of the years he'd measured life in square footage and profit margins. "Because," he said slowly, 2 8-year-old girls walked into my office wearing an oversized apron and carrying their mother's dreams. And they reminded me what kind of company and what kind of man I want to be." Mina smiled through tears. Maris reached across and squeezed her sister's hand. The decision was made. Sterling insisted on driving them home himself. The night air was sharp, the city wrapped in winter breath. Mina fell asleep almost instantly in the back seat, exhaustion finally winning. Her head tipped against Maris's shoulder, the apron pooled over both of them like a blanket. Maris stayed awake. She watched the streetlights pass, counted them out of habit. Old buildings gave way to quieter blocks, the harbor fading behind them. "You didn't have to do all that," she said softly. Sterling glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Yes," he replied, "I did." She considered that. Most people don't. Sterling didn't argue. They stopped in front of a modest apartment building, aged brick, clean steps, dim hallway lights. The kind of place that worked hard just to stay standing. Lucia was waiting at the door. She looked smaller than Sterling imagined. Pale, wrapped in a sweater far too thin for winter. The moment she saw the car, she ran. Maris opened the door and was immediately pulled into her mother's arms. Mina woke with a start and cried out, "Mom," before being gathered in too. "I'm here," Lucia sobbed. "I'm here. I'm so sorry." Sterling stood back, watching the 3 of them cling together like survivors after a storm. Lucia finally looked up at him, tears streaking her face. "I don't know how to thank you." Sterling shook his head. "You already did," he said. "You raised them." He handed Lucia a folder, papers neatly arranged. "Rest tonight," he added. "Tomorrow we'll talk details." Lucia nodded, overwhelmed. As Sterling walked back to his car, he felt something unfamiliar. Not pride, not power, Peace. Behind him in a small apartment filled with relief and tears, a family slept without fear for the first time in far too long. And high above the city, a lonely penthouse no longer felt like home, because something far more valuable than silence had finally found its way in. Morning arrived softly for Lucia Reyes, not with panic, not with the landlord's voice echoing in her head, not with the sharp dread of calculating impossible numbers before coffee. She woke to light filtering through thin curtains, and the sound of steady breathing, 2 sets of it on either side of her bed. Maris on the left, Mina on the right, both still tangled in sleep, the oversized apron folded neatly on the chair like a relic from another life. Lucia's fever had broken sometime before dawn. Sweat cooled on her skin. Her body felt hollowed out, weak, but her chest felt lighter than it had in years. For a terrifying moment, she wondered if the night before had been a dream. Then she saw the folder on the kitchen table. Clean, crisp, real. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were printed documents bearing the logo of Crown Urban Estates, each page heavy with words she'd never dared imagine belonging to her life. Position details, benefits, a start date, and a lease. Lucia pressed a hand to her mouth and sank into the chair. The numbers were clear. The address even clearer. A 2-bedroom apartment, heat included, walking distance to a school. She wept quietly so she wouldn't wake the girls. Later, when Maris padded into the kitchen rubbing her eyes, Lucia pulled her into a tight embrace. "It's real," Lucia whispered. "All of it." Maris nodded, not smiling yet. "We figured," Mina followed, hair wild, eyes soft. "Does this mean we don't have to listen to phone calls anymore?" Lucia knelt and hugged them both. "No more listening through walls," she said. "No more counting days." They stood together in the small kitchen, wrapped in the kind of relief that comes only after surviving something unbearable. Across the city, Sterling Crown sat alone at his breakfast table for the first time in years, coffee untouched, gaze distant. For once, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Sterling arrived at the office earlier than usual. Nadine noticed immediately. "You're smiling," she said cautiously, setting down her tablet. "Am I?" Sterling replied. "Yes," she confirmed. "That's new?" Sterling didn't deny it. By 10 a.m., Lucia Reyes sat across from him in a conference room flooded with winter light. She wore her cleanest sweater hair, pulled back hands folded tightly in her lap. Maris and Mina waited outside with Nadine coloring quietly, the apron draped over the back of a chair like a silent witness. "I want to be clear," Sterling said, sliding the contract toward Lucia. "This role isn't charity." Lucia nodded quickly. "I wouldn't accept it if it were." "I know," Sterling replied. "You'll oversee scheduling, supply management, quality checks. You'll have authority." Lucia swallowed. "I've never managed people before." Sterling met her gaze. "You've been managing a crisis for 8 years. This will be easier." Her eyes filled, but she held steady. "Thank you for seeing me." Sterling shook his head. "Your daughters made sure I didn't miss you." He stood and opened the door. Maris and Mina looked up instantly. Lucia knelt in front of them, tears finally free. "It's official," she said. "We're okay." Mina burst into tears. Maris hugged her hard. Sterling watched from the doorway, something tightening behind his ribs. He thought of Eleanor again, how she'd believed in people before they believed in themselves. "Come," he said. "I want to show you something." They followed him down the hall to his office. Sterling removed a frame from the wall. Inside it was Lucia's resume, now smoothed, flattened, preserved. "I'm keeping this," he said, as a reminder. Maris tilted her head. Of what Sterling smiled softly, that the most important meetings don't always come with calendars. Weeks passed, then months. Change came quietly, but it came. Lucia thrived. She learned systems, quickly earned respect without raising her voice, fixed problems before they spread. Staff trusted her because she understood exhaustion, because she remembered names. Maris and Mina adjusted too. New school, new route. No more memorizing bus stops in fear, only in curiosity. Sterling noticed the shift in his own life last. He found himself leaving meetings early to help Mina with math, listening to Maris explain her latest book with solemn intensity, laughing, actually laughing, when Mina corrected his grammar. The penthouse changed. Photos replaced empty walls. Shoes by the door that weren't his. Noise that felt like life instead of intrusion. One evening, as the girls worked on homework at his kitchen island, Sterling paused. "Do you know what you did?" he asked them. Maris looked up. "We brought the resume." "You brought yourselves," he corrected. "And that changed me." Mina smiled shyly. "You're nicer now." Sterling laughed, the sound surprising even himself. At a staff meeting months later, Lucia announced a new initiative: flexible schedules, childcare support, emergency housing assistance. "Because someone once helped us when we had nothing," she said. Sterling watched her speak with calm authority, watched the room listen. He felt proud, not as a boss, as family. That night alone in his office, Sterling looked at the framed resume on the wall. The handwriting at the top caught the light. "My daughters are my everything." He understood now. Sometimes success doesn't come from what you build. It comes from who walks into your life wearing hope like an oversized apron and asks you to be better. And sometimes if you say yes, you never feel alone again. The penthouse had not hosted a celebration in years. Sterling Crown stood in the doorway, surveying the space as if seeing it for the first time. Balloons, soft blues, and warm golds floated gently near the ceiling. A modest cake rested on the marble island, its candles unlit for now. Paper plates. Streamers taped a little crookedly. Evidence of life. Evidence of courage. Maris and Mina's 9th birthday had arrived quietly without expectations. Lucia had offered to keep it simple, cupcakes at home, maybe a movie. Sterling had refused. "No," he'd said. "This matters." Now, as the elevator chimed and the doors opened, the girls stepped out hesitantly, holding hands. Mina froze. "Is this for us?" she whispered. Sterling nodded. "For both of you." Mina gasped and covered her mouth. Maris blinked rapidly like she was trying not to miss a single detail. The windows behind Sterling glowed with the city's winter dusk, the harbor lights shimmering like they'd been arranged just for this moment. Lucia stood back, eyes wet, overwhelmed by the sight of her daughters standing in a place she'd once cleaned, but never imagined entering as a guest. "Happy birthday," Sterling said. Mina ran forward first, hugging him hard around the waist. Maris followed more carefully, then held on just as tight. Later, when candles were lit and wishes whispered, Sterling watched them close their eyes together. He wondered what they wished for now, when fear no longer owned their nights. As they blew out the candles, applause filled the room. Laughter followed. Real laughter, the kind that echoes. Sterling's son arrived soon after, children in tow. The penthouse filled with motion, running feet, overlapping voices, crumbs on the counter. Sterling stood still in the middle of it all, stunned by how right it felt. "Dad," his son said quietly, stepping beside him. "You seem different." Sterling nodded. "I am." What changed? Sterling watched Maris explaining a game to her grandchildren with solemn intensity, while Mina spun in circles, laughing. "Two little girls walked into my office," he said, "and reminded me what matters." That night, after everyone left, Sterling sat alone at the table, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was full of echoes. Time did not rush. It unfolded. Lucia Reyes became indispensable. What began as managing housekeeping teams grew into overseeing operations across multiple properties. She solved problems before they reached Sterling's desk. She advocated for workers others overlooked. She listened, and people followed her. Maris and Mina grew taller, steadier. They learned to trust routines that didn't revolve around fear. School projects replaced survival plans. Sleep came easier. Once a month, Sterling started a tradition dinners at different restaurants across Harbor Light City. No phones, no assistants, business meetings, he called them. Maris took the title seriously. She offered opinions on lobby designs, lighting choices, even playground layouts. Sterling implemented more than one of her suggestions. Mina focused on people. "Do the janitors get breaks?" she asked once. "Do they have coats for winter?" Sterling adjusted budgets without hesitation. At 10, the girls began visiting the office after school. They did homework in the break room. Employees learned their names, learned to smile again. The penthouse transformed slowly. Framed drawings replaced abstract art. Shoes lined the hallway. Noise became normal. Sterling noticed it one evening as he watched Mina explain fractions with exaggerated hand motions. He wasn't counting the hours anymore. He was living them. Lucia never forgot the moment everything changed. She ensured Crown Urban Estates introduced programs for single parents, flexible scheduling, emergency housing scholarships. She spoke openly about struggle, and others found courage in her honesty. "You gave us a chance," she told Sterling once. "Now we give it back." Sterling listened and learned. Years passed. Maris grew thoughtful, deliberate. Mina remained soft but unbreakable. They no longer wore the apron, but Sterling kept it folded, preserved alongside the resume. Sometimes late at night he would stand at the same window where this story began. But the city no longer felt distant. It felt shared. 5 years to the day after the twins first walked into his office, Sterling reserved a quiet restaurant overlooking the harbor. Lucia, Maris, Mina, Sterling's son, his grandchildren, and several employees gathered around a long table. Candles flickered. Glasses clinked. Sterling stood. 5 years ago, he began voice steady but thick. 2 8-year-old girls took a bus across the city in winter. They walked into my office wearing an oversized apron and carrying a crumpled resume. Maris smiled. Mina looked down, bashful. "They didn't ask for money," Sterling continued. "They didn't ask for sympathy. They asked to be seen." He raised his glass. "They reminded me that courage doesn't announce itself loudly. Sometimes it shows up quietly, shaking, determined." Applause followed. Lucia wiped her eyes. Later that night, Sterling returned to his office alone. He stood before the framed resume hanging on the wall. The handwriting at the top had faded slightly with time. "My daughters are my everything." Beside it hung a photo Nadine had taken years earlier. Sterling kneeling, 2 small girls in an oversized apron standing before him, hope written across their faces. Sterling touched the frame lightly. He thought of Eleanor, of the man he might have become without this interruption. Harder, smaller, alone. Instead, he had family, chosen, earned, real. Somewhere in the city, Maris and Mina slept peacefully. No alarms set for survival. No notes left on pillows. Sterling turned off the office lights and headed home. Not to a penthouse of silence, but to a life filled with voices, with purpose, with meaning. Because sometimes the greatest success you will ever know comes not from what you build, but from who you choose to see when they walk through your door wearing hope like armor, asking you without words to be better. And if you are brave enough to say yes, everything changes. By the time Maris and Mina turned 11, Sterling Crown had learned something unexpected. The most difficult questions in his company no longer came from boardrooms. They came from the back seat of his car. "Why does that building look darker than the others?" Mina asked one evening as they drove along the harbor road, rain streaking the windows. Sterling glanced over. "Older wiring. We're scheduled to upgrade it next year." Mina frowned. "But people live there now." Maris leaned forward. "And if the lights are bad, it doesn't feel safe." Sterling slowed at a red light. He saw it suddenly not as an asset, not as a timeline, but as a place where children might lie awake listening for footsteps. "I'll move it up," he said quietly. That became the pattern. Once a month, their business dinners expanded into walking tours, site visits, conversations that no spreadsheet could contain. Maris focused on structure and fairness, clear rules, clear promises. Mina focused on people, faces, names, exhaustion hiding behind smiles. Do they have somewhere warm to eat? Do their kids wait alone after school? Do they feel invisible? Sterling began carrying a small notebook again like he had when he was young. Not for profit projections, but for questions. At work, Lucia noticed the change immediately. "You're listening differently," she told him one afternoon as they reviewed a proposal. Sterling nodded. "I'm being trained." Lucia smiled knowingly. "By the best." They implemented new policies quietly at first. On-site childcare options, emergency housing vouchers, winter gear stipends, not as charity, but as infrastructure. Because survival shouldn't be optional, employees noticed. Turnover dropped. Pride replaced resentment. One evening, as the girls worked on homework in Sterling's kitchen, Mina looked up suddenly. "Do you ever miss being lonely?" she asked. Sterling blinked. "No." Maris raised an eyebrow. "You answered too fast." Sterling laughed. "I miss quiet sometimes, but not lonely." Mina smiled, satisfied. Outside the city glowed, still vast, still busy, but now threaded with meaning. Sterling Crown realized something profound. He hadn't just changed a company. He'd changed the questions it was built on. The box arrived on a Tuesday. Plain cardboard. No return address. Sterling found it on his desk when he came in that morning. Nadine hovered nearby, curious. "Open it," she said. Inside, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, lay the apron. The same oversized white apron. Cleaned. Pressed. The faint bleach stains still visible. The dark thread still holding the seam together. Sterling's chest tightened. Beneath it was a note in Lucia's handwriting. "I thought it was time you had this back. The girls don't need it anymore. But I think you might." Sterling didn't speak for a long moment. He carried the box home that night and laid the apron across the kitchen island. When Maris and Mina saw it, they stopped short. Mina reached out but didn't touch it. "I forgot how big it was." Maris nodded. "It used to feel heavy." Sterling folded it slowly. "It was heavy," he said, "because it carried more than cloth." They framed it together that weekend. Not flattened, not hidden, folded gently as if someone might need it again someday. Lucia watched as Sterling hung it beside the resume in his office. "You don't have to keep it," she said softly. "I do," Sterling replied. "It reminds me that hope is something you can wear." Later that evening, Mina sat beside him on the couch. "Do you think," she asked carefully, "that other kids will ever need aprons like that?" Sterling considered the question honestly. "Yes," he said, "but maybe fewer." Mina nodded, satisfied with that answer. Outside, snow began to fall soft, quiet, harmless. Not every winter was cruel. On a cold evening not long after Sterling found himself back at the window where it had all begun, 42 floors up, the city lights still flickered on at dusk. Ships still moved slowly across dark water. The skyline still bore his name in steel and glass, but the reflection in the window had changed. Behind him, the apartment hummed with life. Laughter from the kitchen, the soft rhythm of homework pages turning. Lucia's voice on the phone, calm, confident, unafraid. Sterling didn't turn away from the glass this time. He stood there remembering the moment he'd said, "Send them up," a decision made without logic, without numbers, without guarantees. Just instinct, just humanity. Maris joined him, hands in her pockets. "You always stand here when you're thinking," she observed. Sterling smiled. "You're very perceptive." Mina appeared to leaning against his side. "Are you thinking about that day?" "Yes." "Would you do it again?" Mina asked. Sterling didn't hesitate. Every time. Lucia stepped into the room watching the three of them framed by the city lights. You know, she said quietly, you didn't just change our lives. Sterling shook his head. You changed mine first. Lucia smiled. No, you chose to see us. That night, as the girls went to bed and the apartment finally grew quiet, Sterling returned to his office one last time. He looked at the framed resume, the folded apron, two simple objects that had redirected an empire. He turned off the lights and closed the door, not because the day was over, but because tomorrow, like every day since, would begin with the same choice: to notice, to listen, to see, and to remember that sometimes the smallest visitors carry the heaviest truths and the greatest chances to become someone better. The first snowstorm of December hit Harbor Light City like a warning. Wind howled through the harbor streets, whipping icy rain into needles. Power lines trembled. Sirens echoed far away. And in the older buildings, Sterling Crown-owned buildings he used to see only as numbers, families huddled under thin blankets, hoping the heat wouldn't fail. Sterling stood in the lobby of Crown Tower that morning, watching tenants shuffle past in wet boots, collars pulled tight. A maintenance worker rubbed his hands together for warmth, face tight with fatigue. Mina's question from weeks ago replayed in Sterling's head. Do they have somewhere warm to eat? Sterling turned to Nadine. Get Lucia. Within minutes, Lucia Reyes stepped into his office, calm and composed in a navy coat. She had the steady presence of someone who had lived through emergencies and learned how to beat them. You saw the weather? Sterling said. I already sent extra crews to the older blocks, Lucia replied. Space heaters piped salt for the steps. Sterling nodded. I want more. Lucia studied him. Define more. Sterling reached for a notepad and wrote 3 words at the top: the winter program. Emergency housing, he said. No tenant of ours sleeps in a car. Not this winter. Not ever. Lucia didn't smile. She didn't praise him. She simply nodded like a commander accepting orders. Food support, Sterling continued. Partner with local kitchens, vouchers, deliveries to seniors. Lucia's eyes sharpened. We'll need a screening process and a hotline. Do it, Sterling said, quietly, with dignity. And childcare? Lucia asked, already thinking ahead. Sterling hesitated, then remembered Maris and Mina on that bus, counting stops like a prayer. Yes, he said. Childcare assistance. After-school safe rooms in our community centers. Warm lights. No kid waiting alone. Lucia's voice softened for the first time. You're building infrastructure, not charity. Sterling nodded. Because charity can disappear. Infrastructure stays. Over the next weeks, the program spread through Crown urban estates like a tide. Maintenance crews installed better lighting in hallways and parking lots. Insulation upgrades were moved forward months. Community rooms were opened late with soup and hot cocoa on storm nights. And at the heart of it was Lucia, efficient, relentless, humane. One afternoon, Maris and Mina walked into the office, now 12 cheeks flushed from the cold. Mina held a small tote bag with donated gloves. Maris carried a clipboard, serious as a prosecutor. We're here for the winter program, Maris announced. Sterling raised an eyebrow. Oh, Mina nodded solemnly. We're helping. It hit Sterling then, sharp and unmistakable. This wasn't just a program. It was a cycle breaking. 2 girls who once begged the world for stability were now offering it to others. Later that night, Sterling stood at his window again, watching snow sweep across the harbor lights. He had built towers. But Lucia and the twins were building something more difficult. A city that felt warmer than its weather. The letter arrived without warning. Not an email. Not a text. A real envelope, cream paper, Sterling's name written in familiar handwriting. His son. Sterling sat at his desk and turned it over once, twice, as if the weight of it carried more than words. Nadine lingered. Want privacy? Sterling nodded. She left quietly. He opened the envelope and unfolded a single page. Dad, I don't know how to say this without sounding dramatic, but I need to try. I've been thinking about you a lot. Sterling's throat tightened. For years when Mom died, I thought you locked yourself inside your work because it was all you knew. I didn't blame you. I just didn't know how to reach you. Sterling leaned back, eyes fixed on the lines. Then I came to that birthday party. I saw you laugh. I saw you kneel down to help Mina with her math, like it mattered more than your meetings. And I realized you didn't need someone to fix you. You needed a reason to live again. Sterling swallowed hard. I'm sorry I stayed away. Part of it was distance. Part of it was fear that if I came too close, I'd have to admit how much I missed you and how much I missed Mom. Sterling's hand trembled slightly against the paper. Maris and Mina talked to the kids like they were family. Lucia thanked us like she didn't belong at the table, and you looked at her like she did. You looked at all of them like they belonged. Sterling stared at the words until they blurred. Dad, I'm proud of you. Not because of the company, not because of the skyline, because you chose people. He exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that feels like surrender. I want to come home more. Not for meetings, for dinner. I want my kids to know you not as Grandpa Crown, but as the man who shows up. Sterling pressed the paper against his palm like it could keep him steady. At the bottom, one final line: Mom would have loved them, and she would have loved the version of you I saw that night. Sterling didn't cry loudly. He simply sat very still, as something inside him healed quietly, like snow settling after a storm. That evening, he called his son. When the line picked up, Sterling spoke first, voice rough. I got your letter, he said. A pause. Yeah, Sterling cleared his throat. Come for dinner this weekend. Another pause, then a soft, relieved laugh. We will. Sterling hung up and stared at the framed apron on his wall. He realized that kindness hadn't just saved Lucia and the twins. It had reopened a door he'd thought was sealed forever. A door back to his own family. 5 years after the first visit became 10. Harborlight City changed in subtle ways: brighter hallways, safer courtyards, community rooms that stayed open late. Crown Urban Estates became known not just for luxury towers, but for how it treated the people who lived in its older buildings. And in Sterling Crown's office, 2 objects still held the highest honor: a folded apron, a framed resume. On the 10th anniversary of that winter day, Sterling did not throw a gala. He did not call the press. He invited only the people who mattered. Lucia, now director of operations, walked in, wearing a coat that fit perfectly, no longer borrowed, no longer thin. Maris and Mina, 18, now stepped beside her. They were no longer small, but Sterling still saw them that way, sometimes 2 brave shadows on marble floors, holding a wrinkled sheet of paper, like it was holy. Nadine set dinner plates in the conference room. Sterling's son arrived with his family, laughter filling the hallway before anyone even opened the door. When everyone was seated, Sterling stood with a glass in hand. You know, he began, and the room quieted. I've given a lot of speeches in my life. Most of them were about growth, expansion, profit. Mina grinned. Boring. Laughter rippled through the table. Sterling smiled. Yes, boring. He set his glass down and leaned forward slightly. His voice softened into something truer than any keynote. 10 years ago, 2 8-year-old twins took the bus across this city in winter. They wore an oversized apron so I'd take them seriously. They carried a resume because they believed paper could protect their mother. Maris's eyes glistened, but she held her chin high, the same way she had at 8. Sterling continued. In my entire career, I have never seen courage that pure. Not in deals, not in negotiations, not in men twice their age. Lucia wiped her eyes quietly. I used to think success was what I built, Sterling said. Towers, contracts, a skyline. He gestured toward the window where the harbor lights flickered on like they always did. But that day taught me something else. The greatest success is who you choose to see. He looked directly at Maris and Mina. "You didn't just save your mother," he said. "You saved me from becoming a man who could look past suffering and call it not my problem." Mina's voice was soft now. "You're not lonely anymore." Sterling nodded. "No." Maris leaned forward. "Because you said yes." Sterling exhaled, the truth settling into the room like warmth. He stood at the end of the night after hugs and laughter and dessert and walked back into his office alone. He stopped in front of the framed resume and apron. 10 years, hundreds of decisions, thousands of employees. But it all still traced back to one moment, one choice, one small knock on a door. Sometimes the smallest visitors bring the biggest blessings. Sterling turned off the light and smiled into the dark. Because for the first time in a long time, the dark no longer frightened him. It simply meant tomorrow was coming, another day to see people, to help, to choose kindness, and to remember that love, in the end, is the only empire worth building. Did this story move you? Share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you don't miss other heartwarming stories. Click on the last screen to see the next emotional chapter waiting for you. See you in the next story.